Chapter 35. Transcendence. Have you ever heard of the phenomenon where a person is somehow able to use more strength than they should? More than should be possible? Sleeping Empress asked, her previously perfect face now showing faint signs of swelling. Trying his best to ignore the piercing headache, Ronin considered the question. No, I can't say that I have. During their match, Ronin had somehow managed to land a punch on the girl. His presenceless technique had worked. Though it had only distracted her briefly, it had given him the opening he'd needed, letting him momentarily slip past her guard. The aloof and arrogant girl was finally going to explain the reason behind her abnormal strength. Sleeping Empress said, pondering as she gently stroked her chin. After a short moment, she exclaimed, "Oh, this should serve as an adequate example." She began to gesture with her hands. Imagine a small shuttle toppling over a child. Now the child's mother should not be able to lift this shuttle. It should by all accounts be impossible, but in a desperate attempt to save her baby, she does. She lifts the shuttle. Ronin's eyes shot up. Wait! So that's what you're talking about? Isn't that just some old folk tale? He furrowed his brows tentatively. You mean to say it is not a myth? Sleeping Empress gently nodded her head. It's far more than a myth. In fact, we've known about this for a long time, and there's been plenty of explanations for it over the years. The beautiful girl wet her lips, then began explaining. Long ago, scientists believed themselves to have found the solution. They argued that, when faced with the extreme situation of, say, for example, losing one's own child under a crashed shuttle, the person's fight-or-flight response will activate. The claim was that this would cause the body to become flooded with adrenaline, thus giving the person enough strength to lift the shuttle. Ronin was confused. But this is a virtual game. A little adrenaline flooding your body in reality shouldn't affect anything relating to your strength here. The girl acknowledged the statement with a slight nod. Indeed, as time passed, scientists soon discovered many cases of individuals breaking the fight-or-flight theory. There was still something missing. Some people simply displayed too much strength for just adrenaline to be enough. So, they came up with new theories. She began raising her fingers one by one as she continued. They came up with the rare gene theory, which claims that the increase in strength can also come from some individuals possessing rare genes. But alas, that wasn't enough either, and they began claiming that this impossible strength came from some people being able to override their own mind's self-preservation instincts, effectively allowing them to use 100% of their body's innate strength. Ronin, now entirely transfixed by the conversation, couldn't help but blurt out, "But using 100% of the body's innate strength wasn't enough either, was it? None of this can explain how a virtual body in a game can become stronger." Yes. This dilemma of finding explanations for this strange increase in human strength, then later finding out that said theory is insufficient, has been going on for millennia. We call this the human potential paradox, and there's still no scientific answer for this. You said scientific, but what about other explanations? He asked. When he received the Potentia panorama in his vision, he'd seen planets destroyed from the mere aftershocks of that fight. Could this be another path to power? The girl closed one of her fists, then stared intently into Ronin's eyes, her voice blazing with passion. Willpower. It all has to do with the mind, but what we tap into isn't neurons, adrenaline, genes, or anything like that. Those things are merely side effects. Willpower is a force in and of itself that can directly affect the physical world, and it doesn't end with just an increase in bodily strength. That is only the beginning. Affect the physical world? Do you mean like moving objects with your mind or something? This was it. There were others out there, just like himself. People with powers. I've already said enough. In this world, knowledge is a resource, and resources can only be exchanged for other resources, but... She paused, did something with her hands, and a ping sounded out, notifying Ronin of an incoming message. Plug this address into your quantum net portal, and it will lead you to the Transhumanist Collective. It's a group that organizes and shares all kinds of knowledge relating to human transcendence. If you have star coins or knowledge of your own, you can find what you're looking for there. With that, she ended the conversation, closing her fingers into a fist as she cocked back an arm. "Wait! What are you—" Ronin began before a powerful punch crashed onto his head, ending the temporarily halted match. Ronin, now with his face solidly planted into the ground, heard the game voice announce his defeat, then was promptly kicked from the lobby. When he came to, he was once again back in the standard sandy coliseum. Ugh, couldn't she have just canceled the match? He grumbled, rubbing his head. Regarding what she'd said, though, perhaps he should pay that site a visit. This was the first piece of information he'd heard of something relating to the alien artifact. Though his abilities didn't seem to come from willpower, they at least should operate on something similar. The Transhumanist Collective, huh? Doing his best to ignore the worsening headache, Ronin exited the game. Back in the Gothic-styled lobby, he sat down in the red velvet chair, then entered in the address he'd been given. Within seconds, the dark blue interface before him queried him on the change. Unregistered URL detected. Proceed? Yes/no bracket. He quickly affirmed his decision and entered the new site as his lobby began changing. First, the carpeted stone floor changed, turning into an ebony-colored, plastic-like surface. Next, the walls shifted into a faintly yellowish-white material, and his red velvet chair transformed into a stylish white ball chair. The swaying meadow outside the window turned into a sea of stars, scattered within a purple-colored nebula. And finally, to finish it all off, rounded black and white stations began to rise up from the ground. Every single one of these stations had screens in them, and when the screens turned on, they all showed a double helix, rotating under a row of bold letters. Transhumanist Collective, Ronin thought as he read the text. So she wasn't lying. Walking up to a station, he entered the database and began to look for information. Rows upon rows of articles appeared, but they all seemed to cost star coins to read. Looking further into this new currency, Ronin found he could exchange other currencies for star coins, but not the other way around. Tar credits, however, could not be exchanged. It was not even listed. Seems Tar truly is a backwater's kingdom, he thought, frowning as he began looking for something he actually could read. Scrolling down the lists of posts, he eventually happened upon a free article. It seemed to be a sort of introduction to the site, as well as transcendence in general. He skimmed through the thing, and after sifting through most of the site-related info, he found something. From what the author claimed, there were two main paths to power. One of these paths were, as Sleeping Empress had said, through willpower. The other path was related to intuition and what some would call the sixth sense, allowing for abilities involving things such as psychometry and retrocognition. Ronin, however, found nothing related to the Potentia panorama. There was no mention of anything resembling the anomalous energy emanating from the alien artifact. In fact, There did not seem to be any mention of any energy whatsoever. Ronin frowned. Seems I'll have to start earning star coins if I want something more relevant. He decided to write a couple of texts describing how presenceless and the Calvrakian embrace worked. It was unlikely the techniques would work without the alien artifact, but if someone out there was actually stupid enough to buy the information, he'd at least get the funds needed to begin his own research. After writing how the techniques worked, how to perform them, then adding in some detailed illustrations where needed, he set the price to 1 star coin per article, then pressed publish. What's the worst that can happen? He thought, rubbing his hands together as he exited VR. Some bad customer reviews? Technically, he hadn't written anything false. Somewhere along the spur of Cygnus, within the W51 nebula, a desperate man entered VR. He'd been logging in here every day for months now. Being from an old aristocratic family, Conrad had lost everything he'd ever cared about during the Revolution. He'd seen his mother, father, and sister being hauled off for an interrogation they'd never returned from, and he was angry. Number. Something far beyond that. He knew no words which could describe the rage he was feeling. But he did know one thing. He would stop at nothing for his revenge. He once again entered the Transhumanist Collective's information site, looking for anything new that could help him make things right. That's when he spotted it. 2 new articles listed for only a single star coin each. He could afford that. The 2 articles' abstract not only promised greater physical strength, but stealth as well. It was the perfect techniques for a would-be assassin. The perfect techniques for vengeance. Physical strength was not something some random detector would pick up. He would appear as unassuming as any random passerby. He wouldn't be stopped as he approached the nation's false leaders. It would be the last thing they'd look out for when he made the killing blow. He purchased the techniques, left VR, then immediately began training according to the illustrations, feeling euphoric as he made the first stance. The very energies of the universe itself seemed to flow into him, entering his body as they began strengthening every part of it. It was then that he noticed something else entering him as well. Something parasitic that most definitely did not belong. Along with those magical energies, there was something foul, something rotten, a defilement. He bent over, dry heaving at the horrific thing inside of him, but the strength he'd felt. The feeling of doing those stances was too addictive. He needed more. If he got his vengeance, he could bear the rot. No, he would bear it. Unbeknownst to Conrad, his need for vengeance, which already had been almost all-consuming, swelled, becoming even greater. He quickly entered VR again, leaving a positive review under one of the articles. He wasn't quite sure why, but he felt that more people needed to know about this new path to power. It needed to spread. Chapter 36. Scouting the Market. After his perusal of the Transhumanist Collective, Ronin exited VR, then went over to Simon's to help finish the cockpit. Working long into the night, they eventually managed to complete the ship, and Simon's headed home. After waving the bulbous man goodbye, Ronin immediately hit the bed. He still found it hard to believe. His whole life he'd thought science was the be-all and end-all of reality, but not only had he been wrong, he'd been wrong several times over. In addition to whatever was happening to himself, there were now 2 new paths out there: willpower and intuition. Needless to say, sleep did not come easy this time. Be it the piercing headache he'd gained from using presenceless in VR, or the ideas buzzing around his mind, he struggled getting some shut-eye for hours. And when he finally did manage to drift off, he was soon woken up again by the implant alarm. Beep! Beep! Beep, beep. Ronin groggily shut the annoying thing off, then checked the time. 6 hours. It would have to do. He had some factory bots help bring the Heidenreich out onto the runway, put on some clothes, then followed. Those 6 hours of sleep hadn't eased his headache at all. Ronin grumbled out a curse as he ran the pre-flight diagnostics. At least the ship seemed fine. He entered the cockpit, flipped on the anti-gravity module, then took off, making sure to stay within the factory's perimeter. He next flew back and forth along the runway a couple of times, then slowly rolled the ship. At least the upgraded inertial dampeners are functioning properly, he thought as he hovered upside down. From within the cockpit, he looked up and found himself staring directly at the ground. Though he was pretty much weightless at this point, at least his future cargo should remain secure. Ronin couldn't pilot the Heidenreich like he had the Hemsway. The Hemsway had been a small ship with easy-to-understand controls, but this 10 meters long behemoth was a different beast altogether. He might be daring, but without a driver's license, there were limits to how far he'd be willing to go. To truly test this thing, what he needed was an actual pilot. Someone who could floor the gas like no tomorrow, then see what broke first. Well, this small test was enough for now anyways. Ronin gently landed the cargo ship back down, then headed back towards the bed. Pretty much everything he owned was clustered around that one area. The VR chamber was there, his clothes, the hero maker, his exercise racks, his weight plates. As he arrived, Ronin pushed some clothes aside, then spent about 25 minutes practicing the Calvracian embrace. Finally, after holding the 12th stance for about half a minute, he then collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. He'd nearly died in his conflict with Spectre. Heck, he didn't even know if the man was dead yet. The bounty he'd placed on the guy sure hadn't worked. It had been over 2 weeks since Nagata had helped place that thing, and Ronin still hadn't heard a peep. When he really thought about it, he'd been close to dying dozens of times these last few months. The assault on Spectre's lair alone had caused him to feel death breathe down his neck on at least 3 occasions. Be it when that ship crashed, those big lasers began to target him, or when that missile nearly struck. His own abilities had been the only thing separating him from oblivion. To Ronin, one thing remained clear above all else. With or without Spectre, if he was to survive, if he was to secure his future, he needed to become strong. The government had proven useless, and whatever else the alien artifact was, it was also a lifeline. He moved on to one of the exercise racks, then began to load up one of the barbells with plates. Each plate weighed 100 kilograms. Each plate looked massive. He'd caught several of his guards chuckling at him when they'd seen him lift. They'd probably thought he'd been using fake weights. Well, they weren't entirely wrong. After moving past the 1-ton range, the regular steel barbells had begun to bend, and Ronin had been forced to swap out the steel for something stronger. Both the barbells and racks now consisted of reinforced Kangdarium alloy, the same thing his warsuit had been made of. He placed 7 of the heavy plates onto each side of the bar, then fastened them tight with clamps. Placing his shoulders under the now 1.4-ton heavy Kangdarium rod, Ronin pushed up, lifted the bar off the rack, then began doing squats. As minutes became hours, Ronin went from exercise to exercise. Eventually, he reached his last set for today. 75, 76, 77, 78. Ronin counted as he lifted himself up on the pull-up bar. His clothes were now soaked in sweat, and a pool of it had begun building up on the floor. "Good afternoon. I see you've tested the Heidenreich," Simon said as he walked over. Hang on, Ronin replied gruffly. 94, 95, 96. I was thinking about our new design project. You've mentioned that we need to design a ship of our own, and that we need to be able to sell it, right? Humpy, Ronin simply grunted, too strained to talk. 106, 107, 108. He did need to start earning credits soon. Out of the original 800 million credits he and Nagata had taken from the CLM, he'd received 640 million. After buying the factory, the hero maker, patents, mercenaries, as well as a range of other things, though, his fortune had shrunken down to 530 million. In other words, in just over 3 months, he'd lost over 100 million credits. What about making another racing ship? Simons continued. Ronin did his last 120th pull-up, then dropped down. A racing ship, eh? He replied, furrowing his brows as he worked the idea over. The professional racing circuit is extremely expensive, but it also has high margins for profit if your brand makes it. There is no way, however, for a small company like ours to compete in such a competitive market. Don't tell me. Does Simons just want to? A slight smile formed on Ronin's lips. Simons, you just want to design another racing ship, don't you? There's no way we'd be able to sell something like that. Simons's bald head began to rapidly shake. No, I would never have such selfish thoughts. Ronin raised an arm. Relax. He tore off his weighted vest, the 200 kilograms heavy thing producing a loud clang as it struck the floor. Actually, now that I think about it, there really might be a way. It would be an unorthodox way, that's for sure. But if we play our cards right, we should be able to both design and sell ships, and we wouldn't even have to compete with the open market. Simons perked up. Oh? It's not something criminal, is it? Because if it is, I want no part in it. Ronin groaned. Would you stop with that? I have a place in mind, and though you might want to bring some security along to where we're going, it's all pure and honest business. Security? Asked Simons. And what do you mean by going? Will this plan involve leaving the factory? Ronin was indeed planning on leaving the factory. With the bounty on his head gone, more opportunities had opened up. He wasn't going to ruin the surprise for Simons, though. I'm not going to spoil anything yet, but the place I have in mind will be quite the venue if I dare say so myself. So, what do you say? You in? Simons made a confident nod. Of course, as long as it's legal, there's no issue. He patted his big chest. It's a racing ship after all, right? It was a bit odd for the guy to be this confident, but whatever the reason was, it was not for Ronin to dig into. He nudged his implant, then sent Simons a list of what to bring. The event won't begin for another 8 hours or so there's still plenty of time. Just remember, don't bring anything expensive. You'll understand once we get there. Ronin next picked up the academy uniform, then headed for the bio-rinser. If this plan was going to work, he would need to look presentable. 10 minutes later, and a new and refreshed Ronin was leaning back on a couch, slogging through a dense tome on materials science. That cursed headache was making everything harder, even studying, but he'd be damned if he was going to let that stop him. As he sifted through the pages, 2 things quickly became evident. If he was going to make a racing ship, he'd need to use strong materials for the frame of the ship. A racing ship would be exposed to much higher strains compared to other types, and if he skimped on this, the ship could tear itself apart. Secondly, he'd also need to use as light of a material as possible. Racing ships had to accelerate fast and make rapid turns, and the lighter his ship was, the faster it would be. Hours passed as he continued looking into all kinds of different materials. One section in the text in particular described a type of carbon nanotube-based alloy. Looking further into how the material functioned and was made, he opened up a 900-page-long document. As he began to scan through the pages, it became evident that the carbon alloy was neither the lightest nor the strongest material out there, but it was cheap. It was also something he had the equipment to make. Though it required a complicated process to manufacture, he didn't mind the challenge. He almost lost track of time as he delved further into the wonders of this material. For a technology thousands of years old to still be relevant to this day is almost unheard of. Carbon truly is the most incredible element in the universe. Not only is it the crucial ingredient for life, but it's also essential to materials science as well. About 400 pages into the document, Ronin checked the time. It wasn't long until that special event would take place. He nudged his implant, then sent Simons a message. "All right, you ready?" Simons next walked over from the design studio, but Ronin noticed someone else following along as well. Dmitri? Why was his head of security here? "We've been waiting for this thing for quite a few hours now. Hopefully it won't disappoint," Simons said, receiving a nod of agreement from Dmitri. "Don't worry about that. But more importantly, why are you here?" Ronin asked, looking pointedly at his guard captain. Dmitri shrugged. "You've got a good employee. Besides, with you two being the only two designers here, I'll still be doing my job, right?" What in the world had Simon said to him to convince a man like Dmitri to come along? From what Ronin knew of the guy, this wasn't like him at all. "Whatever," Ronin said, shaking his head. "Just make sure to register with the defense system in the Heidenreich before you enter." The trio next walked over to the big ship, Ronin in the lead, as Simons helped the guard captain with the registration process. After he entered, Ronin placed himself in the pilot's seat, activated the anti-gravity module, then took off for District 92. The place they were heading to wasn't far from his previous home. It's why he even knew it existed in the first place. You had to be in the know to find a place like this, or get an invite if you had the right friends. One thing was certain, though. You'd never hear of a place like this on the net. Descending deep into one of the valleys of Ironglades, the trio was eventually met by a stream of neon lights, loud, groovy music, laughs, and the revving of engines. Ronin found them a suitable place to land, making sure to place the ship in a conspicuous spot, clearly visible to any potential thief. He wanted someone to try to steal it now. As they exited the ship, ahead, he could see people dancing, people relaxing against walls with drinks in their hands and men carrying laser guns. No one wore yellow here, though. The planetary guard still worked to suppress the Ruddles, but with or without those vermin, this far down in the city, any form of law enforcement was a rare sight. As they approached the venue, Ronin saw more. Some of the people around were just drinking in the atmosphere, vibing along with the mood. Others sat upon shuttles, some on top of overhangs. To the side, he saw people grill and sell food, adding in new scents to the air. "Kiboris! Fresh Kiboris! Come have a taste!" someone shouted from a stall. Ronin inhaled deeply. He was home. "What sort of place is this?" Simons asked in wonder. Along the street, there were hundreds of shuttles, all unique in their own way. From Vantablack racers, stylized in bold, fat, orange text, to deep red shuttles, covered in intricate black designs. Every ship here had a personality. Every ship had a name. "You wanted to make a racing ship, right?" Ronin began as he walked up to one of the food stalls. "This is the place where enthusiasts gather to discuss, look at, and compete with ships. If you've got a cool ship, this is the place to show it. If you've got a fast ship, on the other hand, this is where you race." As Ronin started ordering a couple sticks of kibori, Simons erupted. "Don't tell me. Is this a gathering for illegal street racing?" "Shh, not so loud." Ronin hushed. "If you shout like that, we'll all be thrown out." "I would have to somewhat agree with Simons on this," Dmitri said, his voice turning stern. "I did not expect I'd be guarding a company involved with crime when I was assigned here." Shaking his head, Ronin breathed out in exasperation. "Listen, this was never about designing illegal ships. Look at those ships displayed along the street. Were they illegal when their owners bought them?" Simon's eyes shot up. "Don't tell me." "Yes. Every single one of these ships are illegal only because the people who bought them modified them. The companies who originally made them followed the law. Think about it. What if we made a racing ship, perfectly in line with today's regulations, but we deliberately made it easy to modify? Wait, that could actually work. Extra space for additional boosters, an engine that can be easily replaced or modified." Simons began, getting more and more excited as he talked. Ronin nodded eagerly, then handed Simons one of the kibori sticks he'd just bought. "Now you're catching on. Here, some food before the show starts." Chomping down on the freely offered stick of food, loud crunching sounds rang out as Simons closed his eyes in delight. "What an incredible flavor. Where in the world did you learn about this, Ronin, for it to have such a unique taste?" Off to the side, Dmitri made an awkward expression as Ronin began explaining. "I agree. Kibori is far above the average synth paste bar. I'd imagine it'd normally be hard to come by now as well, considering the amount of ruddles roaming about lately." "Ruddles? What do you mean?" Simons mumbled, his mouth filled with food. Before Ronin had the chance to, Dmitri coughed awkwardly and replied, "Kibori is made from 6-legged yellowish insectoids about the size of a man's palm. They're one of the few remaining creatures endemic to the planet, and a favorite snack of the ruddle." "What?" Simons nearly spat out the food in his mouth. "I'm eating bugs?" He looked outraged, though that being said, it did not stop him from continuing to chew. Ronin spotted him swallowing another mouthful. He really must have liked that kibori, and Ronin could see why. "What are you getting so descriptive for, Dmitri?" "It's tasty," Ronin mumbled out in between mouthfuls, having already begun eating his own stick of kibori. Dmitri was about to respond, but was interrupted by a commotion happening down the street. A gray-colored rinky-dink shuttle was descending amongst the other racing ships. It stuck out like a sore thumb as it landed, but judging by the crowd forming around it, people did not seem to mind. "Look, it's the speed demon!" Ronin heard someone shout over the music. Speed demon. The door of the gray shuttle opened, and a red-haired man dressed in a red and black racing suit walked out. From behind, Ronin could hear Simons, his melodic voice sounding baffled as he asked, "Hey, doesn't that look like—" "Yeah, I think it is," Ronin finished. Walking out of the gray shuttle was none other than Cadet Hurricane. He's the rising star of the Space Force Academy. Why in the world would he be here? Simons's voice sounded shaky. Raising his eyebrows, Ronin glanced back at his bald companion. "Why don't we find out?" "Hey, Hurricane! Over here!" he shouted, waving at the man. Whereas Dmitri only looked confused, unaware of how famous Hurricane really was, Simons was busy hiding behind Ronin. "Put your hand down," he hissed. "Are you crazy?" "Don't call him over." It was too late, however. Hurricane had already turned his head. He began to make his way towards the trio in a hurry.